The bitter winds of the Korean winter cut through the valley like knives. Snow fell relentlessly, turning the hills into an endless sheet of white. In the heart of this frozen hell, chaos was brewing. Captain David Smith, a rugged but brilliant U.S. Air Force pilot, gritted his teeth as he peered out from his damaged plane. Smoke poured from the engine, sputtering and coughing like a dying beast. Smith knew he wouldn't make it back to base. Behind enemy lines, no reinforcements, no way out. He crashed in a clearing, the plane skidding wildly across the frozen ground before slamming into a tree. Dazed but alive, Smith ripped himself free from the cockpit. He had no time to think. Gunfire crackled nearby. Enemy tanks were on the move, but Smith wasn't the type to wait for death. He grabbed what he could, a standard-issue bazooka, a handful of shells, and a service pistol, and set off into the trees, the bitter cold biting through his flight suit. As he stumbled across the snowy terrain, he spotted them. A small group of American infantry, trapped and pinned down by North Korean tanks advancing rapidly toward them. They had little cover, no artillery. Their radio had been destroyed. They were outnumbered and outgunned, sitting ducks. Smith didn't hesitate. He sprinted toward them, dodging bullets that whizzed through the trees. The soldiers, recognizing his Air Force insignia, stared in disbelief. "Sir, you're a pilot. You shouldn't even be here." Smith grinned grimly. "Neither should you. Let's do something about it." The men gathered around. Smith quickly assessed the situation. 3 enemy tanks were rumbling toward them, supported by a dozen infantrymen. They had no heavy weapons, just rifles, a couple grenades, and Smith's bazooka. "Listen carefully," Smith barked. "We have one shot at this. We use the trees for cover. We get close, real close." He divided the soldiers into 2 groups, one to provide cover fire, the other to move in stealthily with him. The first tank loomed into sight, its barrel swiveling, seeking targets. Smith gave the signal. Gunfire erupted. The American soldiers unleashed a hail of bullets, drawing the enemy's attention. Smith, crawling on his belly through the snow, approached the nearest tank. His fingers numb, he aimed the bazooka. One breath, one shot. Boom! The rocket screamed toward the tank, striking it squarely in the side. The explosion rocked the valley. Metal twisted. The tank burned, but there was no time to celebrate. The second tank turned toward them, its machine gun spitting death. A soldier beside Smith cried out, hit in the leg. "Keep moving!" Smith roared. He reloaded the bazooka with trembling hands. Another shot, this time at the tank's treads. Direct hit. The massive machine lurched, crippled, unable to move. But the third tank kept coming, faster, angrier. Smith made a split-second decision. He handed the bazooka to a young private and shouted, "Cover me!" Then, without a weapon, he sprinted across the open field, drawing the tank's fire away from the wounded and the others. Bullets tore into the ground around him. Snow exploded at his feet. But somehow, miraculously, he reached a cluster of trees near the enemy tank's flank. The young private, heart pounding in his ears, aimed carefully and fired. The third tank went up in flames, its crew scrambling out, only to be met by a wave of American fire. Silence fell over the valley. Smith, panting, looked back at his battered group of soldiers. They were alive, bruised, bleeding, but alive. The enemy infantry, seeing their tanks destroyed and leaderless, began to retreat. Smith gathered the men. "We're not done yet," he said. "We move together. We take the hill and call for backup." Under his leadership, the ragged group advanced, seizing the high ground and reactivating a damaged radio from an abandoned vehicle. Minutes later, the sweet sound of friendly aircraft filled the sky. Reinforcements were on their way. Captain David Smith, the pilot who wasn't supposed to be there, had led an infantry defense against tanks with nothing but a bazooka, a handful of courage, and the refusal to give up. When he finally returned to base days later, battered and frostbitten, they asked him how a pilot ended up leading a tank battle. Smith just smiled and said, "Sometimes you don't choose the fight. The fight chooses you. And in that frozen valley, history was made. Ending line for video. In the harshest battles, true leaders rise from the most unexpected places.